Like, why are we focusing on this education thing? And why are you deciding to write a paper on the topic of your choice? Keep in mind that you're going to find within this whole realm of education, you're going to find your one thing that kind of makes sense to you, that you want to investigate and then argue. And you're going to argue that for a real-world audience. So you're going to decide who's going to receive this argument you're writing. Not just me. It should go on to the superintendent or to the newspaper, to our principal. You decide. All right, so here we go. We're going to start with this question. You're going to talk about this with the person next to you. But let's test your knowledge of the world. I want you to talk about which country in the entire world is the richest in the world, has the largest military, is the center of business and finance. In other words, the whole business global community kind of revolves around this one country. Has the strongest education system. It's the center of innovation, invention, pushing things forward, progressing in the world. It has a currency that's the world standard of value, and it has the highest standard of living. It's the same country for all of these. Talk about that with the person next to you. You've got 1 minute to go.
It's not America. Japan. Not America. So it's Japan.
No, because is there education on there? No, there's no education. Okay, but okay, it's not America. It's not Japan. I'm pretty sure it's a country that's really small.
England. Maybe England.
No, it's not England. So it's like one of those like small countries that are getting up there.
Take 5 more seconds.
Yeah. But it says we're like 16.
Probably. Then because I move around too much. I was going to say you can comment right there. And then, this is going to be a hassle if you go back and take notes.
Yeah. I'll try and multitask.
Can you post that to our Facebook group?
Yeah.
They say China. So.
All right, let me have you back up here.
I don't think so.
Real quickly, what do you think? What country?
America.
No.
America? I love that. I love that. That burst of patriotism. Where's Daniel? Of all days for him not to be here. Oh, he's here. Well, on the plus side, now we can talk all kinds of stuff on the Republicans. Just kidding, we'll be fair and balanced. America, not the answer. Japan has almost no military.
Oh yeah,
so they're out. China is a great guess, but our military dwarfs theirs. As crazy as that sounds, we spend more in military.
Is it
Canada.
Kind of a trick question. The answer is actually England.
Oh, Europe.
All of these things apply to England in 1900.
Oh.
None of them apply now. And I want you to, this is going to be our starting point. England started out in 1900 with all of this. And by the year 2000, they had none of this. The United States started out in 2000 with most of this. Where are we going to end up by the time your kids are adults? I don't know. We could go the same route England does, or we could not go that route. But I think you and I probably agree that education has a lot to do with that, right? Education has a lot of influence on where we end up. But I want you to start with the premise that it's very possible that the United States drops in many of these things, including the standard of living. The standard of living you see your parents experience might actually be higher than what you experience. Okay? Now, to get us started, let's take a look at our federal debt. All right? This is how much money we have owed chronologically. This is World War II, as you know. And so we had to, I don't know, can you see that okay? Okay. So we had to borrow a little bit. Our debt went up a little bit. And then after every war, the economy tends to stutter. And so you oftentimes see a little bit of an increase in debt after the war. Because you get people coming back from fighting, they don't have jobs, and unemployment costs money, and et cetera, et cetera. So you see a little bit of a spike, and then it comes back to normal. And it stays normal. By normal, I mean it stays consistent throughout the 50s. Rock and roll is born. Yeah. The 60s, the Beatles come to the United States. Level of debt is still the same. 1964, I'm born. Debt raises a little bit. 68, still the same. 72, the Eagles come around. Still the same. '76, we have the bicentennial, we have the oil crisis, but the debt still remains about the same. Starts to float upward a little bit during that oil crisis, and then Ronald Reagan is elected president. Many people consider him to be one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. They want to put his face on Mount Rushmore. I don't agree, but a lot of people really think the world of Ronald Reagan. But look what happens to the debt when he's in office. It just skyrockets. And then his vice president, George Bush, the dad, becomes president, and it continues to skyrocket. And then Clinton gets into office in the middle of a recession, and it continues to skyrocket. The second half of his term, it kind of levels out. He's the only president in recent history not to add a lot of debt to our nation. And a lot of people thought at the time we had this great, healthy economy. And probably if you, in the middle of the day, found yourself with all kinds of energy, like really feeling the blood pumping through you, you'd think to yourself, well, I'm pretty healthy. I feel really good right now. But what if that feeling of feeling pretty good was preceded by eating like a bowl full of sugar? In other words, what if you felt good and energetic because you had just eaten a big bowl full of sugar, just solid sugar, nothing else, just white sugar straight into your mouth? You'd feel all energetic, yeah? What would happen to you about 3 hours later?
Crash.
You'd crash. And so the late 90s, we were eating sugar, basically. We were creating kind of a false economic system based on borrowing money and spending that borrowed money. Does that make sense? I've just totally oversimplified a very complex situation, but that's what we did. My point is this: it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican, who controls Congress, what's going on, the level of debt has skyrocketed almost consistently, except for a brief period where we did some crazy things that really set ourselves up for disaster. 2001, we have 9/11, Bush gets into office, and I don't know what your feelings are of George W. Bush. I'm going to tell you straight out, he was horrible for the economy, he was horrible for education. You might like him for other reasons, and that's fine, I don't fault you for that. But for those two things, he was a really crappy president. And I want you to see that the spending just increased. I don't even have Obama on there. But if you were looking at this chart, what would you say about the United States?
We're going to crash.
We're heading into oblivion, right? When we borrow this money, this is $12 trillion in debt. When we borrow this money, who are we borrowing it from? China. For the most part, it's China. And so when you hear people talk about, like, our military, we got to beef up our military for security. The truth is, just between you and me, the truth is, we're never going to get invaded. We're never going to get conquered. We're going to get bought. And that's where we're headed. This is the most recent chart I could find. As of 2012, we're up to $16.39 trillion. And they're fighting right now, the Republicans and Democrats, over, there's like a limit, you know, like a credit card, you have a limit? Well, the government has a limit to how much you can borrow. Okay? Since George W. Bush became president, through his term and Obama's, that debt limit has been raised 13 times. It's like you've maxed out your MasterCard, so you go back to MasterCard and say, hey, I need more credit. And then they increase it, and then you max that out. Well, I need some more, and then they max that. 13 times in 13 years. Right? So that's where we are right now. Okay? We're at 16 trillion. Unprecedented. No generation in the country's history has experienced what you're inheriting. This is so much debt. I don't know how we get out of this. In the past, some people have said, well, you know, because of inflation, that's why it's so high. But here's dollars adjusted for inflation. You'll see the United States historically has been pretty consistent. And then recently it's gone sky. So, can we get out of this? Can we do something for our economy? Can we produce goods and materials in order to climb our way out of this and have money necessary for a healthy economy? If we have a healthy economy, then your standard of living is probably pretty good, and your kids have a pretty safe and happy future. So I want you to imagine for a second that you own a Walmart. You own the Walmart. And you're in, let's say, Beefy, that's the name of the town, Beefy, Idaho. You're the only department store in Beefy. Okay? You're it. So pretty much all of the people in the town are coming to your place to shop, right? There's 100,000 people in the town, and they're all coming to your shop because why? Nobody else around. Okay? Now, I want you to imagine for a second that at the end of the year, Target starts construction. And it's not just any Target, it's one of those super Targets. You know, groceries and stuff? Yeah? And that's one of those high-tech Targets. The person next to you, talk about what would you expect your business to do after the super Target moves into town? Let's talk about that.
Lower prices.
Yeah.
Competition.
Bring it. No. Lower prices or better equipment? Or no? Products? You know that too? That's my points.
I'll try and post it on the wall.
About 5 more seconds. Okay, let me have you back up here. What's happening to your business? Competition, what? It drives your profits higher? No. In this case, it's going to eat into your profits, right? It's going to drive them down because why?
They're buying from
They're being bought from as well, right? You've got 2 places where people are going to buy from. You're not the only game in town. What if it was a super Target and a Costco? What happens to your profits? So, even more, huh? What if it were a Target and a Costco and a Sam's Club? I think that's a different game. Yeah? What happens to your profits? You may even need to cut some people, right? You may have to let. What if it's a Sam's Club and a Target and a Costco and a Smart and Final and a Ralph Superstore and a 99-cent store? Then you really have to be strategic about what you're doing. Am I correct? Right. So let's just back up a little bit here. End of World War II, what state is Europe in? You know this from AP Euro history, yeah? It's destroyed. They've got no factories. They've got no production. They've just got hungry people that want shelter. And so where do they have to go to buy the cranes to build things, the construction know-how, the pots and pans produced in factories? Where do they have to go to buy their food?
In the
United States of America. We are the only Walmart. Right? And then as time goes on, there's a little bit of competition, but not too much. And then in the 1990s, there's a great deal of competition. And other countries start producing college-educated people. And the foci for these other countries tend to be science and engineering, medical. In the United States, we produce an awful lot of college graduates with majors in sociology, communications, the humanities, like me. And what we start to find is that in the 1990s, the demands for science and engineering can't be met by students from the United States of America because they're majoring in the wrong things. But what we can do in the 1990s is we can go to other countries like India and China and Eastern Europe, and we can say, hey, you have the college education, but there's no jobs for you where you live. We have jobs, but we don't have college-educated workforce. Not in this particular area. So why don't you come to the United States of America? And so they do. If you've been in a hospital in the last 10 or 12 years, do you notice anything about the ethnicity about most of the doctors and the nurses? What do you notice?
Arab.
Are they white?
No.
They tend to be from the Middle East or Eastern Europe, don't they? That's the product of this thing that happened in the 1990s. Well, in the 21st century, we hit a wall because India, China, and Eastern Europe caught up to us. And they could say to their college-educated workforce, hey, you don't need to go to the United States anymore. We've got jobs right here for you now. We now have the infrastructure to offer you a job where we didn't before. And so the United States, because we're not producing kids that are skilled in science and engineering, go to India and say, hey, why don't you come to the United States and work? And they say, why would I do that? Right? I got my own country right here. They speak my language. I got my family here. I got my wife and kids. Why would I go to your country? Cost of living is cheaper here. And so that's where we are. We're in this horrible job market, and the myth is that there's no jobs available. But there's lots of jobs available. We're not producing the kids to fill them. So if you're, it is just a side note, if you're sitting in this room right now and you're contemplating what to major in, science and engineering, you'll be wealthy. You'll be set for life. Because we're not producing it, and we need those workers. You want to major in communications? Good luck. Now, you're setting yourself up for a tough. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm just saying, it's a much tougher job market. Okay, so this guy named Fareed Zakaria, I love this guy's writing. He's written a lot of books on the subject. He wrote a thing for Newsweek, and he said this: power is moving away from the traditional centers of the global economy, the Western nations, to the emerging markets. To put it more bluntly, the United States is in the beginning of a period of relative decline. It may not be steep or dramatic, but the fact that it's happening is clear. Even if one assumes a slowdown, the other big economies will still grow at 2 and 3 times the pace of the West. Over time, they will take up a larger share of the global economy. The United States and Western Europe will have thinner slices. It's not defeatism, it's math. We're not the only Walmart anymore. And we're either going to be strategic when we didn't need to be before, right? When we were the only Walmart, we didn't need to be strategic. We're either going to be strategic and get through this, or we're not going to be strategic, and your standard of living is going to drop, and your kids are going to drop even more. Okay? So that's kind of the crossroads we're at. Okay, stop for a second. What questions do you have so far? All right, keep going. I don't have a crystal ball. You guys don't either. We don't know for sure what's going to happen. All we can do is kind of take a look at the trends and stuff. There's a book, though, that was written called The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. It's a great book. I encourage you to read it. And it just talks about what are the trends that are out there. Where is this world headed? And he's got this quote in here. He says, we've observed a troubling decline in the number of U.S. citizens who are training to become scientists and engineers, whereas the number of jobs requiring science and engineering training continues to grow. That's from the National Science Board. All right? So we've got this deficit of workers. We need people that are trained in science and engineering. We're producing people that are skilled in business, in humanities, in communications, and sociology, stuff like that. He also said, Science Board also says, between 1990 and 2000, the proportion of foreign-born people with master's degrees rose from 19 to 29%, which means what? Why is this? Because we're importing them. We need them to fill the jobs that our own citizens can't fill because they're not getting trained in the right areas. So we're bringing them in between 1990 and 2000. And the proportion of foreign-born with PhDs in the science and engineering labor force rose from 24 to 38%. That means 38% of the people doing jobs in science and engineering are from other countries. We've plucked over here. And now they've stopped. Not stopped, they've slowed down a great deal. There's very few of them coming over here anymore. By attracting scientists and engineers born and trained in other countries, we've maintained the growth of our labor force in science and engineering without a commensurate increase in support for the long-term costs of training and attracting native U.S. citizens to these fields. In other words, at the same time we were importing them, we weren't doing anything for our kids to kind of shunt them into these directions. We were just letting them major in whatever they wanted to. If you take a look around the world, if you go to China, for instance, and Bill Gates is there to make an appearance, there's like they cancel work, they cancel school, there's parades, people line up for hours to see him, they get his autograph. In Friedman's book, he has this great quote. He says, in China today, Bill Gates is Britney Spears. And the problem is that in the United States, Britney Spears is Britney Spears. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That they look up to small people while we be looking up to these people.
When you say these people, what do you mean?
Not like they're just celebrities. They're not
Yeah.
They're not helping our country like in those fields.
It's a great way to put it. They're looking up to the people that are progressing their country. We're looking up to people that flash their panties in public. That's the difference. Okay, I don't know if you can see this or not. This is kind of an old slide, but I really like it. There's an organization called it's the OECD, and it's an international organization, and what they do is they monitor globally how we're doing in science and engineering, different countries. And their concern is that as a country that we continue to progress researching and developing in these areas. And so what this chart is, these are all the countries lined up, and what percentage of graduates compared to the population. All right, so there we are. Oh, back up. Sorry. There we are. And these little triangly things are 1995, and the bars are 2005. Okay? So for instance, if you look over here at Greece, they're the #1 country. Here's where they were in 1995. Here's where they were in 2005. 80% graduating from high school in 1995. 10 years later, they've got nearly 100% of their population graduating from high school. So here we are in 1995. We've got about 75% of our kids graduate from high school. 10 years later, how much have we changed it? Nothing. No better. The demands of education have risen, but we haven't educated more kids. Does that make sense? Now, if we were to look at that in 2013, it would be unchanged. If anything, we've dropped back a little bit. And then here's the other slide from OECD that I wanted to show you. They kind of stratify the ability levels, and they assign them different levels. If you can work the cash register at McDonald's, you're a level 1. Okay. If you've got like high-tech skills, you're a level 5. So they're looking at the level 5s. These are the people that are really going to move our country forward. And what these bars are, they've differentiated by age. Okay? So you'll see virtually every country has a very large 55 to 64-year-old population that are level 5. And that's because it takes quite some time for training and education, right? So let's take a look at Norway. They have a lot of people that are age 55 to 64 that have science and engineering capabilities. A smaller group from 45 to 54, a healthy group from 35 to 44, and a very healthy group from 25 to 34. That means their future looks pretty bright because they've got a nice chunk of people that are inheriting the places that their older people are leaving off. Does that make sense? Did I go too fast just now? Or? Okay. So here's what I want you to see. Here's us. Here's our science and engineering course. Can you see people my age? Is that little white mark right there? That's 35 to 44. That's the generation that follows me. And there's your older brothers and in some cases your parents. What's going to happen in 20 years? If we can't go to other countries to pilfer their scientists and engineers, what's going to happen? We're going to have a slowdown like you've never seen, right? We simply don't have, we're not producing the people to do the jobs that we need them to do. All right, so we were #1. We've got this big chunk of people that are #1, bigger than any other country, and we've dropped to #7. Korea used to be number 27, now to #5. So you can kind of see where the trends are going. All right, so let's talk about education in the United States. I wanted to kind of like frame why we're doing this, why this matters. So here's a chart. I got this from the Census Bureau. This is a chart of the United States in 2000. And it shows where there are heavy concentrations of Hispanics or Latinos. Okay, so the darker the color, the heavier the concentration. What does that mean to be heavily concentrated? What does that mean? There's more of them compared to the general population. Okay? What do you notice about the distribution of heavy pockets of Latinos and Hispanics?
More towards the south.
Say again, Rob? kind of the south part of the country and the coast, right? Not too many here in the heart. Okay. But just about everywhere else. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yes.
Look at North Carolina. Doesn't that surprise you? Virginia. Right? Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey. Doesn't that kind of surprise you?
Yeah.
No? Just me. Look at Nevada. Yeah, look at California.
Yeah. That's
So it kind of looks like we have a divided country, right? Like part of it's really white and part of it's Hispanic Latino.
yeah.
This chart shows growth in Latino populations. California, not too much, because why? We're already here, right? Yeah, we already have heavy concentration, so we're not going to grow that much. What do you notice about the middle of the country?
It's a lot.
It's growing.
So when you put these two together, what's happening to the nation?
We don't survive.
One thing for everybody. Right? Right? There's almost nowhere. When I wrote my book, which was kind of focused on Puente, I had a line in there that my editor made me take out. But I basically said, if you live in New Hampshire, put my book down. You're like the only state that it doesn't apply. You're all white and you're not changing. Ironically, during spring break, guess where I'm going to do a workshop? New Hampshire. Isn't that funny? One state that I wrote off, and now they're having another. So what does this say about the United States in the future? Talk about this with the person next to you for a minute. What does this say about our future?
Becoming increasingly dreams that probably like our workforce is getting more very simple observation, but yeah. What about you, Eric? What do you think?
Just simple that we just have more explanation. And then what would happen? I don't know.
Joanna, is the name of your snack Do What You Do with Whole Grain? Oh, okay. What does it say about the future of the United States? Say again real loudly.
I said they have to, I said they better start being nice to us because we're kind of taking over.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly that's how I would put it, but maybe I'd amend it to say, we had better do a good job of educating, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? We can't, as the United States has historically done, just said, well, that's them. Right? We can't separate. We're all in this together, and the United States better do a good job of educating 100% of its kids, not just the white ones. And as time goes on, it had really better do a good job of educating this particular population, because this is growing and others aren't. Okay? Part of that is because white people are marrying Latinos, white people are marrying Asians, Asians marrying Latinos, right? We're seeing a lot more intermixing. Yeah. So we got to get good at this. So let's take a look at how we're doing. 1970 to 2000, the combined population, so this isn't just Hispanic and Latino, this is everybody that's underrepresented. The population of underrepresented students exploded, maybe 43 million to 72 million. Underrepresented means if you're 11% of the general population, it should be 11% in the colleges. Yeah? Does that make sense? In the United States right now, about 11% of the United States population is African American. So we should be able to go into the universities and we should see what percent of college students are African American. 11%. If that's the case, then they're represented. The reality is it's about 3%. So African Americans are underrepresented. What about Asians? Overrepresented. Okay? Latinos, underrepresented. Okay? Native Americans, underrepresented. So on and so forth. This population grew at nearly double the size of the general population. Now, as a teacher, that tells me I got to get good at teaching this group. If there are things if there are obstacles to be overcome, I got to figure out a way as a teacher to overcome those obstacles. By 2025, 1 in 4 people of high school age in the United States will be Latino. So I want you to see that this is really important. If we're going to get better as a nation, we got to get better at teaching all of our students, not just some. That's from the Census Bureau, by the way. Over the course of the next 50 years, the percentage of the total population that is white will have shrunk by more than 10%. Okay. So I'm a dying breed. I'm like a pterodactyl. Got a couple of flights left in. Percentage that's Hispanic will double. Okay. So this is our nation. Let's look at how we're doing in educating Latinos. Latinos are 4 times as likely to drop out of high school as white students. 33% of white students, 44% of Asian students will eventually earn a bachelor's degree, while only 7% of Latinos will. Okay. That's from the National Education Association. There's a report that was out recently that shows the colleges are unprepared for Latino students. They're just not doing an adequate job at teaching them and enabling them to succeed. From my experience teaching college for several years, I would agree with that. The mindset of community college professors, especially, that's who I know, is completely wrong. By the year 2020, up to 80% of jobs in the United States are expected to require cognitive. What does that mean? Cognitive. Your brain, right? Thinking skills, rather than manual skills. And 52% of jobs are expected to require at least some post-secondary education. Look at that. 52% of the jobs out there, you got to do something after high school. Was that the case when your parents went through school? No. When your grandparents went through school, totally not the case. Anybody could graduate from high school and go get a job and buy a house and still have a family and have a healthy standard of living. That is just not the reality anymore. The shortage of workers with high levels of communication, mathematics, computer, and other technological skills, already a problem for employers, will become more severe if the Hispanic population continues to be deprived of a quality education. For years, people, oftentimes white people, have said, well, that's just a Latino problem. Or, and I was surprised when my book was first released, I heard this from a lot of people that I kind of respect. They said, it's in their culture. And it was like, I don't have to worry about it. It's in their culture. I don't have to get better at reaching that population. But what I try to show you at the beginning of this is, well, yeah, you do. Because this is one nation, right? And we're all trying to make the nation better. So either education has to change to reach the kids we have, or we're all going to suffer. All right. This is from a report called Our Nation on the Fault Line, put on by the United States government. This is just for California now. California has among the lowest college enrollment rates in the nation. It faces a shortage of 1 million college graduates needed for the state's workforce in 2025. That means that of all the jobs in California in 2025, we're going to have about 1 million too few educated kids to fill them. We're going to have to go to other states to try and find people to come to California. Right? And if you can buy a $100,000 house in Nevada with 5 bedrooms, or you could buy a $550,000 house in California with 3 bedrooms, which would you do? Did I go too fast on that?
No.
You want to pay a lot of money for a house or a little bit of money for a house? Right? So, you know, it's kind of hard to pull kids out to California. Only 56% of California's high school graduates, as opposed to 62% nationwide, proceed directly to college. State ranked comparatively low in other measures, including its share of 25 to 34-year-olds with at least a bachelor's degree, the number of college students who graduated within 5 years. And just 20 to 30% of those with a demonstrated drive to get a bachelor's degree actually transfer to 4-year colleges. In other words, we have kids that want to go to college, and what percent actually make it to the university? 20 to 30%. Right? So clearly, the education institution is doing some things wrong. Right? So in 2003, George W. Bush comes up with this thing called No Child Left Behind. And you can't really talk about education without understanding No Child Left Behind. It's what you're under right now. Okay? Even with the changes in Common Core, we're under No Child Left Behind. And I want to make sure you understand it before we're done today. No Child Left, well, let's start here. How would you say it's affected your experience here at Magnolia High School? Do you know? Was that you? That's funny. I hope that's on your video. That's kind of funny.
I'll annotate it.
You guys know No Child Left Behind is how we track your tests and everything. You know how like May we quit teaching
Yeah.
and we just test you to death?
Yeah.
I kind of like that month because it's not a lot of work for me. I have nothing to grade. I can go online. I always plan out for summer vacations while you guys are testing. How would you say that's changed your educational experience?
Memorize a lot.
Emphasis on memorization. Yeah, what else?
We're used to guessing to find our answers.
You're used to
Like
guessing to find your answers, yeah? Does that seem realistic to you?
No.
No.
Like, as we talk about where this nation's headed, does that seem like a necessary skill? Yeah, I would agree with that. Anything else? Okay. There used to be a time when I was a young teacher, back when I had brown hair instead of gray hair. I did have long hair. I look like Jesus a little bit. There was a time when we teachers used to talk to each other, and we would say, oh, I taught the kids how to blank. I taught the kids to be able to blank. And that's kind of the language we use. And today, here's the language we use. I need to cover the standards. I don't know if you've ever heard teachers say that, but this is how we talk to them. We need to cover we need to cover these standards. What does that mean? That means I'm going to tell you some stuff. You may get it or not. I don't care because I got to move on to the next standard in my pacing guide instead of teaching you how to do something. Does that make sense? All right. Let's back up a second. So let's go to India. They're learning how to take apart a computer and put it back together. They're learning how to create faster communication systems. They're learning the stuff that's going to propel their country forward. And in the United States, we're learning how to put together a food processor. I'm sorry, how to operate a food processor, right? This is actually from the CSTs, grade 11, your year. How to operate a food processor. And we're testing you on that.
They're gonna be on.
Do you agree with me that this is retarded? Yes. I mean, literally. This is not something you would give college-bound kids. And that's what we're doing. And again, the multiple choice tests. All right, so let's talk about No Child Left Behind for a second. Who does it affect? Well, if you read the passage behind me, you'll see that almost all the schools that end up failing have something in common. What's that? It's not ethnicity. It's income. So what we're doing is we're going to low-income schools, and we're saying you're failing. And now we're going to withhold federal dollars from you to punish you for failing. Process that for a second. We're going to give federal dollars to the wealthy schools because they're not failing, but we're going to withhold additional funds from the poor schools because they are. Does that make sense to you?
No.
Magnolia High School. The way it works is No Child Left Behind says you can't just have passing scores, you got to have your subgroups have passing scores. So at Magnolia High School, this is for real now, here are your subgroups. Latinos have to grow by 10% basically, their test scores, right? If they don't, the whole school fails. Whites have to grow by 10%, if they don't, the whole school fails. African Americans have to grow by 10%, if they don't, the whole school fails. Asian Americans have to grow by 10%, if they don't, the whole school fails. Filipinos or Pacific Rim, they have to grow by 10% or the whole school fails. SDS is students with disabilities, special ed. They have to grow by 10% or the whole school fails. English learners are people that didn't start out speaking English and learned it as a second language. They have to grow by 10% their test scores or the whole school fails. If one of these subgroups fails, we all fail. We're a failing school. Right now, are we a failing school?
I think so.
Yes. We had, I think, 2 groups not make their targets. Okay. This should be SES, I'm sorry. This is poor kids. They track by income as well. Now, where I live, there's a high school called Mission Viejo High School. Okay? It's very wealthy. Let's look at their subgroups.
Really?
No. Now, what point am I about to make?
It's easier for them to pass.
Yes. We've given Magnolia a much more difficult task than we have Mission Viejo. Not only are their kids coming to them from college-educated parents in a wealthy neighborhood that can afford tutoring, but we've given us lots of ways to fail. So I want you to imagine this for a second. Let me back up. For you to have a subgroup, you got to have 100 kids or more. Okay? So I think this subgroup dropped last year, and I don't think it counts anymore, African Americans, because we're below 100. So I want you to imagine for a second you're a principal. You have 103 Liechtensteinians, people from Liechtenstein. Okay? They're at your school, 103 of them. It's a failing subgroup. It's your only failing subgroup. Because they fail, your whole school fails. And you're losing federal tax money because of it. Your school's headed toward program improvement, which means they're going to take away your money. Your job could eventually be lost. That's the first thing that happens when you become a failing school. You can lose your apprenticeship and get fired. You're the principal, your job's on the line, you've got 103 Liechtensteinians, and 5 of them were involved in a fight on campus. Do you expel them?
Yes. Yes.
Why?
You guys are freaking.
Do you agree that you would all be tempted at least?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't care, Eric.
Sorry, Matt.
Do you really?
No,
You
I'm
gotta
just
go to
kidding.
Savannah.
Yeah, I know.
Now let's bring this into reality.
Like that.
Are there groups that tend to fail more often than not?
Yes.
Tell me one.
Wait, what do you say? Oh.
You'll turn off the recording if you don't feel comfortable. Latinos tend to fail often. So if you're a principal and you have some Latinos get into a fight, and you look at their test scores and you see that they're low, what are you going to be tempted to do?
Expel them.
If you have 2 white kids with high test scores get in a fight, what are you going to be tempted to do?
Not expel them.